Good morning, everybody. This conference will be held in English. Would you need some translation? You can grab helmets at the back of the conference room. Bonjour pour ceux qui cette conférence se tiendra en anglais, donc ceux qui le souhaitent peuvent aller prendre un casque qui se situe donc au fond de la salle. Donc, bonjour, welcome everybody. We are here today to discuss disruption in the energy sector. As all of you know, the energy sector has long been known as a very stable sector. And since a couple of years, we've seen these sectors undergoing a radical transformation due to several disruptions. And we see also a lot of impacts coming up from these disruptions. And this is what we are going to discuss today and debate. We have three panelists. So on my right, I have Luc de Marliave, who is Head of Public Affairs at Total New Energies. Then we have Jean-Pierre Gou, who is Deputy CEO at PowerNext. And then we have Jaideep Raje, who is a managing consultant for EMEA at Lux Research. So to start with, I'm going to give 10 minutes to each panelist so that he can share some of his views from his own experience and track record in the energy sector. And then we'll come back together for the debate. So Luc, to start with.
Thank you very much, Laurence. I'd like to share with you a couple of ideas of experience that we have in this sector. Just to introduce maybe a little bit myself, Total has been interested in renewable energies for many years now, but definitely there has been a step change in 2011 when Total became the majority shareholder of a solar company called Sun Power, and making Total becoming the number two, I would say, among three leaders in solar manufacturing. So we produce panel, we produce cells, solar cells and panels within this affiliate company with a worldwide stretch. So this is the main role we have. And we have a second activity on biotechnologies, where we develop first and second generation bioproducts and biofuels with synthetic biology. But today, because this activity is less mature, biotech is still under development, mostly in the R&D sector, from our standpoint at least, in second generation. So the most disruptive part of our activity would be solar. So I will address essentially the solar activity and share with you a few disruptions as we observe them in this very traditional activity of energy. The first disruption, I think, on solar happened really a few years ago. From 2008 to 2012, we observed a five-fold reduction of costs of manufacturing solar panels. So divide prices of your main source of energy. Essentially, solar is capital investment. It's capex. You invest everything, and then it does not cost anything. You know, solar is for free. So you spend all the money at the beginning, and a large part of it, at least in these years, were constituted by the solar panels itself. So a division by 5 of the cost of this product was really totally disruptive on the market, and changed totally the perspectives. And I observed, for example, year after year, the different visions of the solar exponential growth from many observers, like general institutions like International Energy Agency or IPCC, or even other companies like PP or some majors also produce some future vision, some perspective on that matter. All proved to be wrong year after year. Even ours are still wrong. I mean, for this year, we are still are far by 20% about the growth of solar this year. And so we always revise. We are just revising our forecast for the next 5 years, and we had to increase our forecast for the next 5 years. So it's still an exponential growth, quite explosive, and even Greenpeace was wrong, although less wrong. Maybe they were the closest to the reality, but still far not seeing what is happening. I mean, nobody is really realizing today what is happening with solar. And still today, I think, in the large part of society, there is an underestimation of the disruptive potential of solar. And I'll come to that. Maybe the second disruption is this one, is the fact that solar is becoming the most competitive resource for energy, for electricity, essentially, today. It's not tomorrow. Now it's today. The tendering, even in France or in Germany, for example, which is not famous for a lot of sun, or in UK, the tendering gives prices for solar electricity below 80 euro per megawatt hour, which is the most, among the most competitive sources of energy, at least as competitive as wind, for example, cheaper than new nuclear, of course not cheaper than totally amortized nuclear in France, but generally speak, for any new plant in UK, for example, solar will be cheaper. Even in the US, solar is competitive with gas, although gas is the cheapest in the world in the US today. So really this factor is totally disruptive. This is true to a point, because of course, as we all know, there is no sun at night, so there is solar in the day, not in the night. So you cannot make only solar. So you need solar in a mix of other sources, more flexible. Traditional capacity, existing capacities are totally fit for that. I mean, to supply the balance for the rest, and for solar plus wind, for example. And so in that respect, I would say that up to 20%, we expect that you can provide at least 20% of the energy mix, of the electricity mix, with solar without being totally disruptive. After that, you would need some other revolution, and that one will come with storage, with demand-side management, with some other activities, with the grids, development of grids, flexibility, including the grid. So a lot of new transformation of the system itself that will provide the second step afterwards, leading to, at some point, long-term views of decarbonizing electricity mix. So this is, for me, the second big transformation. The next one is speed. You have to realize, and this is not totally realized by many, when you see a picture, we develop very large-scale projects in California, for example, or in Chile. But when you see pictures of projects from one month to the other in the construction phase, it's just amazing. For me, which I've been working in the upstream part of oil and gas for many years, and projects last 10 years. You know, it's 10 years before you are really out of the ground with platforms, with pipelines. It takes many, many years. In 3 months now, you build a very large-scale solar plants. You know, it's absolutely impressive. You see pictures month after month. It's really amazing, the speed. So this is very interesting for emerging countries. Emerging countries need sometimes investment very fast in Africa or in other countries, and solar is bringing that, which was not the case for traditional energy products. So this is a new disrupting the very accelerated time scale. And then another disruption I would add is the fact that solar is distributed. So you can make concentrated solar. I mean, you can make large-scale plants, 300, 400, 500 megawatts. We are doing that. But you also can make 3 kilowatts plants. You can distribute solar everywhere. And it's the very nature of solar to be distributed, as solar energy is distributed by nature. So this is totally transforming the system to imagine millions of installations instead of very concentrated plants that usually were located among the source of energy. You would make electricity with coal at proximity with either coal mines or harbors, ports. You would make nuclear close to rivers because or the sea, because you need this source of cold energy. You would make hydro in where you have large mountains and everything. So solar is totally different to that. It's totally distributed. So it's transforming also the electricity network system by that way, because it transforms DSOs, distributed system operators, distribution system operators, sorry, or transport system operators. These companies that are handling the grid, now they see two-way circulation of electricity, which before that was only one way, usually for top down, from centralized production down to consumers. And now the future is on both ways, I mean sideways circulation. So this business is totally transformed as well. The grid management, they are becoming totally indispensable for the energy transition. They are providing flexibility, services, electricity services, transportation. So their business is totally transformed. It's very interesting to see how their communication as well is transformed. So this is another disruption. I would say another disruption is the emergence of prosumers. Usually we had producers and consumers, and now we have prosumers, millions of prosumers, people or companies that are able to not only to consume electricity, but to produce it, and they want to consume their own electricity. Usually it's a very attractive situation that you want to consume your own energy. So we see that in the US, for example. Millions of people, they want to have a systems to be able to consume their own electricity. So this is very interesting to see. This is a transformation of perspective. If I ask into the audience who knows the amount of its electricity bill, I'm sure I will not have a lot of success. I'm not trying, maybe. Usually nobody knows how much he pays for electricity. But if you ask the same question to people who have rooftop solars on their home, they all know exactly how much they consume and how much they produce. It's much more interesting for them, this issue. So it's interesting to see the perception also is changing on that issues. We are ready to a new world, which will marry with a digital revolution, but I will not maybe open that today. Maybe that will be for the next conversation on digital. So consequences are already there, but maybe you want, I don't know how much I talk, maybe too much time already. Okay, so I'll keep the consequences maybe for the conversation, for your questions, Laurence.
Thank you very much. So I'm Deputy CEO of PowerNext, and I'll give you a few words on PowerNext. So it's a company that was created in 2001 in the framework of the liberalization of the electricity market in France. The goal of the company was to provide an electronic marketplace for buyers and sellers to exchange blocks of electricity for the next day, the intraday, and also all the maturities up to 5 years in advance. So it was really a tool for France initially. Then this was a success. We teamed up 6 years ago with the German Energy Exchange, and at the beginning of the year, we created a single company that is now organizing the energy markets across Europe in 8 countries, in France, in Germany, in Austria, in Switzerland, in Belgium, Netherlands, UK, and Italy. So we are really dealing with a lot of these exchanges of electricity, but also exchanges of gas. We're also in charge of running the auctions for CO2 allowances for the European states. We are present in coal. We also have a subsidiary in Asia. So now we're a group of around 500 people. And this place, as organizing the exchanges of energy, gives us a great observatory of this disruption that is taking place in energy. And also it provides us a big role to provide the tools to accompany these disruptions, and the role of markets in this new world is really changing because the type of energy that is dealt with on a commercial point of view and the way people use it is totally different. As we are organizing the energy market in Germany, all the renewables in Germany, so you have heard about this transition in Germany, I will tell you more about that, is sold through for our company. And we have worked a lot with the authorities in Germany to design the right model, but also work with the European Commission to come up with the right model at the European scale. And in every country, it's a different setup, but it gives us a good perspective on what's going on right now and what may go on in the 5 to 10 years to come. So I will focus on Germany because it's a very interesting examples to learn. Germany, as you know, they took a very courageous decision to go out of fossil and out of fissile at the same time. So in 2022, nuclear will be phased out, and also they want to increase very significantly the part of the renewables, part of a process that is called Energiewende, meaning energy transition, and this process is run extremely well in Germany. In the Energiewende, they have a target which is to have minus 80% emissions in 2050. That's the same goal that China is talking about, but it's very far from what France is talking about, for example. And they also say about a reduction of 50% of the gross energy consumption in the country. And they want to reach 80% renewable in 2050. And that was a goal very difficult for Germany because when they started to discuss that in the early 2000s, renewable in Germany was only 6%. There had very few hydro, and reaching such ambitious target for everybody was just, let's say, a political promise that people will never deliver. But the reality is that Germany is on the way to deliver that. Last year in 2014, so it was 6% in 2014, close to 28% of electricity in Germany was produced by renewables. And this will continue to grow. In 2025, they aim to be between 40 and 45%. In 2035, between 55 and 60, and 80% in 2050. This transition, if you look at it from the prisma of the, let's say, French newspapers, it always comes with a lot of critics. And I will say that this critique is not justified. You read over and over in France that the electricity transition in Germany came at a cost which was an increase of the CO2 emission due to coal. If you look at the curve of the coal production of electricity in Germany with lignite or hard coal, this production is quite stable. So the emissions produced by that didn't really increase. They were stabilized. So from 1 year, 2000, to another, sometimes it increased by 2%, sometimes it decreased. But the past 5 years, it was stable. But it was stable because they were phasing out the nuclear. So they had to replace huge quantity of nuclear by huge quantity of renewable. So the effect on the CO2, you don't see it yet, but you will start to see it from this year on. Last year, for the first time, Germany emission decreased by 4%, and you will see this emission to really drop very quickly. And they set themselves a goal which was far higher than the goal set by the EU. They want to reach minus 40% emission in 2020, and they will do it. And all these critiques that were made to lignite and coal, I think people have to understand that doing no fissile and no fossil at the same time, it's something extremely difficult, and Germany is keeping the direction. What is very interesting in Germany also is that this transition is coming with a very strong backup from the population. There was a recent poll, 92% of the German found that this energy transition was either very important or important. So they were still backing the government for that, even if some of them saw a very significant increase in the electricity bills. They find that it is very fundamental to do this transition. This transition, we speak a lot about electricity, but the Energiewende is also about mobility. It's also about housing and efficiency. It's a revolution that is taking place over there, and rather than criticizing, we should really analyze what's going on there. The effect of this revolution, because electricity flows from one country to another, doesn't affect only Germany, but it affects all the European landscape. In my company, we work very hard over the past 10 years with all the electricity transmission operators to build a process we call market coupling, which is aimed at optimizing the flows of electricity that go from one country to another. So basically, if the price from one country is lower than in another country, we export automatically electricity in the other country up to the capacity between the border. And So we have a vision ourselves on what's going on into the borders, and Germany is exporting a lot of electricity, and the effect on prices that I will describe now is affecting all over Europe. So this, the size of that, so I told you they are already 28% in average, but in certain day, the amount is far bigger than 28%. The record was beat last July, on the July 25th, and it was a very particular day in Germany. So first of all, it was a Saturday, so a day with low consumption, and on that day, there was a very big storm in the northern part of Germany, a storm called Zelsko. And with this storm, it created a lot of wind, a lot of flooding in the north of Germany, and the wind turbines, which were in the north of Germany, produced a lot of energy. But the storm was also cleaning the clouds from the south of Germany, and the solar plants from the south of Germany were producing a lot of electricity. And on that day, at a particular hour, the solar plus, I mean, the renewables represented 78% of the production of electricity in Germany. And I'm sure we'll see in a few years time where 100% of electricity is produced by renewable in Germany. So this is really massive for the type of renewable that they have in Germany. So wind is in terms of capacity. So they have, I think, around 80 gigawatt of capacity installed, not always producing, of course. 35 gigawatt of wind and 35 gigawatt of solar. So it's the same installation capacity and 7 gigawatt of biomass. But biomass, we don't speak a lot about it, but if you look at the output of electricity, biomass is very important in Germany because when you look at the mix of renewable, it's 35% wind, 21% solar, 31% biomass. So biomass is actually producing more electricity than solar in Germany, and hydro 13%, and hydro has been very stable as they don't have a lot of potential. This disruption had a lot of effects on the markets. The first effect is that it creates a lot of unpredictability of the prices because the supply and demand curve is changing all the time. In the past, only temperature was affecting demand. Now solar forecast or wind forecast totally affect the price, and it's becoming impossible to forecast the price of electricity a few days in advance. So the way the market has organized has to really backtrack from long term to short term, and ourselves as provider of tools, we had to reinvent the company for that. The fact that the renewable have no marginal cost, it's only investment as you say, when they are programmed into the network, they decrease the prices, and the prices have decreased very severely. The prices in electricity were between 60 and 70 back in 2009, 2010, and I checked just this morning, the base load of electricity for next year is 28 euro. So it's been divided by a factor more than 2, and that's true in Germany, but it's true in all the other countries in Europe. So the fact that in the prices we don't see the subsidies that is mainly paid by the households, it really provoked a big drop in the wholesale prices. And this big drop in wholesale prices has provoked almost, I would say, the bankruptcy of many big utilities. If you look at companies like E.ON or RWE, which did everything they could to block the transition out of fossil and into fossil, out of fossil and into renewables, these companies are really suffering. The stock value of E.ON and RWE has decreased very sharply. E.ON was around 50 million euro, it decreased to 50 billion euro, it decreased to 20 million euro, and RW for 33 billion to 8 billion. So together, basically now, E.ON and RW, they have the same value as Tesla, which is interesting. Nobody would have forecasted that. Yeah. And just last point, I will give you an example later on, but what we see in Germany, I think we'll see it everywhere. We already see it everywhere. And the disruption in storage, the disruption in local markets, local consumptions will provide the same type of disruptions in the energy markets in the years to come.
Thank you. Jaydeep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaydeep Rajay. I'm a managing consultant with Lux. David, Laurence, thank you for having us here. I'm going to try and share my thoughts through a few pages, if if I can get it going. Yeah. So the good thing is that a lot of how I and my company see the world evolve, you've already heard from Luc and Jean-Pierre. So there isn't going to be a lot of disagreement on some of the high-level messages. What I do want to maybe take a slightly harder stance on is that we are probably seeing a lot of disruption across the world already. So this isn't something that's a looming issue or something that's coming 5 years from now. I would want to argue that across the world, you're already seeing immense amounts of disruption, and I'll try and make that case. I'd also want to sort of parse out the disruption in the form of renewables, the role of energy storage, and then the role of analytics or data. Since not a lot of people here are probably familiar with Lux, we are a US headquartered company with presence in Europe and in Asia, work across emerging technologies in a variety of different areas: energy, materials, biotech, and biosciences. And we work for large companies, and for them, we help identify disruptors and emerging technology companies all over the world. Right? So the views that I'm trying to share with you hopefully synthesize a lot of that global information and a lot of information that comes from feet-on-the-ground disruptors and what they are doing around the world. So primarily, I'm trying to argue 3 different points here today. The first is that predominantly distributed energy and distributed generation is what is disrupting the entire electricity industry. That you've already heard that point. But I'd want to make the case that they're actually disrupting a whole slew of other industries: materials, automotive, computing and electronics, telecom, and all the rest. As you look across this very complex picture, there's very limited number of trends and technologies which I think are what we should focus our energy and attention on. So I'll highlight those very quickly. And then probably leave my remarks open for the discussion at the point of saying that we are truly at the cusp of what could be a once-in-a-lifetime transformation. So I'll want to make that case as well. So a pretty important point to talk about here is something that Jean-Pierre just mentioned. So if you look at the chart on the bottom right, that's exactly the point he was just making, right? So that's the market cap of the top 5 utilities in Europe. And you'll see how dramatically that has fallen down. And that's fallen down largely because of distributed generation and the advent of renewables, more so because these companies have been fighting it so vehemently. Right? There's something completely off balance about the way they have approached the industry and what the consumer and the trends in the industry are talking about. Solar, wind, you've already heard about the dramatic role that they are playing. I'll try and make an argument for energy storage as well. But I would also want to leave you thinking about the role that software and business models and financing, the impact that all of these are having on the way that electrons are moved from one spot to the other and the way that they're consumed and utilized. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you think about distributed generation and the the role that it plays, you start to see a pretty interesting picture evolve, right? So you see a whole lot of things happening on the generation side. We've already talked about them. You've talked about solar and wind, but also waste to power. That's something that's evolving in a variety of different places in the world, especially in the developing markets, Africa, Asia. You see a whole lot of activities happening around integration. So novel inverter technologies, interesting software, and all the rest. But then, as Luc was alluding to earlier, there is some very interesting disruption happening on the demand side. Right? So the way that buildings consume electricity, the way that they're shifting their loads from the peak to an off-peak time, the way that microgrids and communities are coming together, the way that the commercial world is addressing its energy consumption and moving away from that centralized top-down transmission model. And so if you look at this picture, I mean, there are a few things that probably jump out at you. One, it's very complex. Right? There are a variety of moving parts, very many different players, a variety of different technologies that are all in play. And so, when you look at this picture, it's probably easy to think, I don't even know where to start to think about this problem. So what I wanted to do to spur some discussion here today is try and put a stake in the ground and say, okay, if you only had a limited amount of time and resources, which all of us do, what are the few things that, in my opinion, we should all be thinking about and focused on? And I'm going to try and capture that into 5. The first is what Luke was referring to as the disruption around the solar space, which is the advent of batteries and energy storage. I mean, you've heard Tesla mentioned already, but across Europe, across North America, across Asia, there is a slew of new technology players developing energy storage and battery technologies specifically targeted at utility scale power, right? A lot of them, the Gigafactory, for example, the Tesla Panasonic one, is a great example. They set it up hoping for electric vehicles, but realized that there was a lot of overcapacity and are now trying to have a very strong storage angle to it. And you can see this particular disruptor have a lot of really interesting effects. I already referred to peak shifting, but the grid power is not always of the best quality all around the world, right? In Europe, it's great. But if you look at, heck, even North America, it's not that great. Asia, it's terrible. So using a renewables plus storage approach allows you to take care of some of that power quality issues. There is a lot of market dynamics trying to go off-grid. And again, something like this comes quite handy there. A lot of innovative utilities are already trying to do something called benefit stacking, right? So to give value-added services to their customers in competitive markets. And so again, solar plus batteries can come in quite handy there. We've talked about wind today, and you just heard about this very interesting day that happened in Germany. But Denmark, China, they've seen this curtailment or dumping of wind power happen, again, over the last couple of years. And that's the scenario where the amount of wind energy produced was more than was required or could be consumed. And so the utility had to curtail the amount of production that it could do. Well, the way around it is, one, try to do what RWE is doing, which is try and do power to gas, right? Generate hydrogen and use that as a way of storage. You could also think about a lot of innovative technologies around small-scale wind, which allow you to do distributed power. So again, wind is again a very interesting space with a lot of disruption happening there. Conventional fuels. I mean, you've heard from Luke about a lot of scenarios that different players talk about. In none of those scenarios do fossil materials go out of the picture, right? Out through 2050, fossil will still be about 40-odd% of the energy mix, and the dominant one at that. So, again, we have to find a way to improve the way that conventional fuels are utilized. And there's a lot of interesting technologies and disruption happening there already. And what I would call out is digitization or the impact of big data. So GE recently announced the concept of a digital power plant, and we can talk about that a little later, but it's really cool. You do dig into it. One thing we haven't talked about is electric vehicles, or more broadly, zero-emission vehicles. Firstly, the infrastructure that we have around charging of electric vehicles, around refueling of fuel cell vehicles, continues to be a very poor and a big untapped opportunity. But what I think is particularly interesting is if you think about all those batteries that are going into all of those cars that are dramatically penetrating the market, in our estimation, in about 5 years from now, 100 gigawatt hour of storage capacity will be sitting in our garages. In about 15 to 20 years, that could get as high as 10 terawatt hour. That's an immense amount of storage capacity that's just sitting somewhere close to our house, our offices, our commercial establishments. And vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, these technologies haven't really gotten the kind of attention that they deserve. So you do have some players like Mitsubishi working on this, but it's nowhere close to the kind of disruption that's needed there. So again, I think that's an interesting opportunity. And then finally, I mean, you've heard this mentioned here today. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. But we have legacy infrastructure. The reason why the utility industry was so stable and so hard to disrupt is because it's a very capital-intensive game. Even with solar, it continues to be a capital-intensive game. So you have these legacy assets, and somehow you need to go from that centralized legacy viewpoint to something that is interoperable. And digitization is really the only way to do it. So we see a lot of wireless power coming online. We see a lot of low-power transmission protocols coming online, and certainly a lot of big data. So these are the 5 things that in my opinion, are some of the key disruptors and trends for us to focus on. 2 last things I'll mention. One is the fact that, as I said, this goes well beyond the electricity industry, right? That's the reason why I'm trying to highlight electricity and not anything else. And that's because there is an opportunity here for chemicals and materials companies around energy storage. There's an opportunity here for software and computing firms like IBM, but also Greensmith Energy, Sunverge, et cetera, to do software management and demand-side management. There's a role here for banks and institutions and policy agencies around financing. Because again, there are different business models that allow you to reduce the capital intensity of some of these assets for the consumers. And then there is a role here for the consumers, as you've heard before, to become prosumers, right? To become almost a stakeholder in this discussion rather than a passive recipient. And finally, I think one thing I mentioned right at the start, which is this idea of a once-in-a-lifetime disruption. We've seen this, and I'm giving the example of AT&T here. Don't want to pick on them too much, but if you think about the way in which the telecommunication infrastructure was controlled, regulated, and dominated by monopolies and oligopolies, the way in which the internet infrastructure was initially dominated by a single player, and every time, when disruption started to arrive, all of these players were taken to the courts. The courts have always ruled in the favor of the disruption as opposed to in the favor of the monopoly. And you're seeing that happen already with the power and electricity industry. So at the bottom, I've mentioned a couple of examples. But any company today that's looking at this as a passing trend or as a niche is risking standing right in the way of something that has very strong consumer-driven fundamentals. And so, as all of us think about it, think about this as something that's a land shift change as opposed to something that's a emerging trend. Yeah. So with that, I'll end my remarks, but looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you. We have a late joiner. Maybe you can introduce you rapidly before we start the debate.
Merci. Bonjour à tous. Pardon pour ce retard. Je voulais apporter une dimension assez complémentaire qui est que la disruption n'est pas seulement directement technique ou économique. Et d'ailleurs, je viens de me rendre compte que j'ai dans les mains ce qui a représenté une grande disruption dans ce pays qui est la France, qui est le BIC d'origine, et parfois peut amener des transformations sociétales et économique extrêmement rapide, avec une approche assez simple. Mon approche actuellement est très liée dans la relation énergie-climat. Je crois que plus personne ne sait plus qu'il va y avoir la COP21 dans ce pays, et ça amène une dimension très forte qui est la question climatique, et qu'effectivement l'énergie aujourd'hui est reliée à la fois à l'environnement et évidemment toutes les conséquences que ça peut avoir, notamment sur ce qui apparaît très fortement et qui va être une rupture très rapide maintenant, qui est la valorisation des externalités, puisque les questions de taxe carbone vont se renforcer rapidement. Je crois que dans ces composantes là importantes aujourd'hui, il y a la question non plus de la solution miracle qui a été cherchée pendant très longtemps sur le plan énergétique, mais je crois que tout le monde a insisté sur le sujet, mais vraiment sur la complémentarité et la multitude des solutions, et surtout sur le jeu d'acteurs extrêmement complexe. Et je crois que c'est vraiment une donnée très particulière par rapport aux questions d'énergie, c'est qu'on n'est plus du tout dans une logique où il y avait des producteurs d'énergie, des gens qui la transportaient, d'autres qui géraient les questions d'information, mais une vraie question où tout le monde peut contribuer, participer, et notamment sur la place des collectivités locales. Je vais prendre 2 exemples très simples. Celui de la ville de Medellín, qui a créé organise tout un système de production d'énergie renouvelable et qui s'est rendu compte qu'elle en produisait beaucoup plus que ses besoins et qui s'est mis à vendre de l'énergie, donc est devenue producteur elle-même, non seulement avec les villes autour, mais aussi à l'étranger, parce que c'est une ville frontière et maintenant, aujourd'hui, ils vendent l'énergie. Je vais vous prendre un autre exemple qui est la ville de Nantes, qui est en train d'installer sur les toits une centrale globale qui est non pas chacun crée sa petite unité d'énergie renouvelable, mais qu'on peut raisonner à l'échelle d'une ville dans une complémentarité et qui amène la rupture évidemment de la question de la data, savoir qui a le pouvoir de transformation par rapport à ça. Donc je crois que c'est vraiment l'enjeu extrêmement important aujourd'hui et qui... Bon, je vais essayer d'être assez rapide, mais qui amène des grandes clés de transformation qui sont évidemment l'innovation technologique, mais qui n'ont pas de capacité réellement disruptive à l'échelle de la multitude au niveau international si on ne règle pas des vraies questions, des vrais freins qui sont la question des financements aujourd'hui qui est en train de se transformer complètement et pour revenir à la COP21, l'importance du fonds vert, je ne vais pas rentrer dans les détails aujourd'hui, on n'a pas le temps, mais cette capacité des pays du Sud à se développer sur le plan énergétique principalement, pas seulement, mais la clé est quand même l'énergie. Donc ça, être capable de le faire à grande échelle et de financer ces transitions et ces nouvelles technologies qui fait que les rapports pays du Nord, pays du Sud, différence entre les pays du Nord et les pays du Sud n'est pas liée à un univers technologique, mais qui a réellement le transfert pour ne pas augmenter les différences. Mais il y a un deuxième point qui est celui de la compétence, où là, il y a une bascule qui est en train de se faire. Mais je voudrais insister sur le dernier point qui est celui de l'acceptabilité. Aujourd'hui, on est dans une société qui est de plus en plus dans des modalités de transformation à la fois extrêmement rapides, mais très différenciées. Je crois que ce qui était des disruptions absolues où le monde pouvait changer il y a encore quelques temps très très rapidement, aujourd'hui c'est un assemblage de multitudes et je pense que monsieur, dans votre approche, vous l'avez clairement démontré. Donc je crois que c'est une grande liberté qu'on doit avoir aujourd'hui pour être vraiment dans les trois dimensions que sont la question de financement, de compétences, ça veut dire l'attractivité des talents bien sûr derrière, et la question évidemment d'acceptabilité du plus grand nombre, parce que dans ces disruptions énergétiques, en regard avec le climat, tout ça ne peut avoir un impact positif que si on concerne l'ensemble de la société. Alors je vais passer rapidement sur Rifkin, que je trouve un peu superficiel dans la vision, même si c'est intéressant. Mais il y a cette accélération qui est en train de se mettre en œuvre. Donc nous, c'est pour ça qu'on essaye de mobiliser fortement à travers beaucoup de réseaux et je voulais encore remercier et féliciter les Clean Tuesday de cette initiative. Alors, ça me fait bizarre de remercier les Clean Tuesday parce que je suis un des créateurs de cette organisation, mais je pense qu'on est encore au début de cette accélération-là. Et moi, je me suis impliqué fortement dans un projet qui sera au Grand Palais pendant la COP21, où justement, à travers notamment une Breakthrough Night sur les innovations, l'accélération de l'innovation pour le climat, l'enjeu est vraiment dans cette implication-là et le fait qu'on puisse emmener dans ces nouvelles disruptions où l'énergie, encore une fois, elle reste le cœur, hein, quels que soient les sujets qui nous concernent, et qui ne pourra se faire que par des grandes alliances, des grands partages, et aussi de les faire reconnaître pour qu'on soit non pas dans des petites salles, mais aujourd'hui élargir toute la démarche. Et encore une fois, je me réfère à la capacité exceptionnelle qu'a eu les Clean Tuesday, mais comme d'autres acteurs, mais peut-être plus les Clean Tuesday, à faire exister ces démarches-là, ces clean tech, notamment énergétiques, à très grande échelle, quand on part à quelques-uns et qu'aujourd'hui, on peut peser ce que pèsent les Clean Tuesday sur le plan international. Mais évidemment, tout ça n'est pas à l'échelle. Donc je crois que l'enjeu maintenant, c'est celle de la généralisation de ces pratiques. La réunion d'aujourd'hui en fait partie dans Award Efficiency, mais j'espère qu'en tout cas, cette COP21 à la fin de l'année en France sera une grande disruption. On sera plus seulement dans le fait d'en discuter, mais évidemment dans la mise en action et dans la participation de tout le monde.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. The first question I would like to ask you is about the different disruptions, because you mentioned about a technology disruption, solar. You talked about a policy disruption, which is the vision of Germany. Jaydeep, you mentioned also many technology-related disruption, and eventually you also talked about the role of climate, so the regulatory that could come from the climate change, talking about valuing the negative externalities of our current system. So so what we can say, this is a complex world with many disruptions. Are these disruptions the only disruption that we are going to see in the future, or should we expect more disruptions? Are these disruptions interconnected with each other? And should we think about them as something consistent? Or is there, out of all of them, one major disruption which has led all the others to emerge? So how do we need to see through all these disruptions in order to bring a little bit of order and organization, in order to understand better the disruptive effects of each of them? I don't know if someone wants to. I can change the question also.
Maybe just one word on that. All these disruptions are somehow linked to the climate, because solar will not be there if there was not a climate issue. And all of this new technology are driven by this objective that is taken by the countries, subsidized at the beginning, less and less subsidized. This is creating innovation. So the big disruption, I think, is climate change, and all the other ones are sub-ones. And there is one disruption that we didn't really talk about, which is the evolution of the behavior of the people. So technology can, you mentioned that, but the fact that people are more sensible to what they pay, but today they will be more sensible to what they consume, and when they choose a provider, to choose renewable systematically, and also to be more careful about that. And this will be a big change to come, the change in the behavior on the demand side through technology, or just simply by applying common sense.
And just because we spoke about it, Luc, you said the reason why Total went into the solar sector was also because the oil shock, and oil companies started to inquire about renewable energies after 73. So is it a question of climate, or is it a question of the big guys wanted to make money to secure their revenues?
There has been, yes, ups and downs in the development of solar, indeed, in the history. And many companies started after the two first oil shocks in the early 80s, after the 74 and 79 oil shocks, with the idea that oil was a non-renewable, limited future, and that we had to develop alternatives. This went for some years after there was a countershock with a strong reduction of oil prices, and I think this solar activity was only limited to rural electrification, for example, very off-site, what we call the off-site activities, which were limited in volume, very efficient, very productive to connect villages in Morocco or in South Africa, very, very efficient indeed, but limited in impact on the environment. What was definitely the change is, yes, the public policy and essentially R&D policies. When we look in the past at the 10 disruptive R&D projects that are really created what solar is today, we can spot 6 of them to being projects funded by the DOE. So the American Department of Energy has been injecting a lot of money, not only. Europe also has contributed, of course, to the R&D. But we can spot at least 6 of the major changes in the technology of solar in the past with public money. So it's very interesting to see how this has been working very well. R&D during the 70s, the 80s, starting with spatial technology. Solar was essentially spatial at the beginning, for space activities, and then progressively cutting costs and becoming this major disruptive factor that we see today. But nothing would have been possible also without the German policy. So climate change is really there. Not only climate change, but the willingness of German government to go out of nuclear. So this is a very strong, so this dates back to the 70s. So it's been a long time that Germany has been willing to do that, and they really paid for the massive development of solar. And that's what we benefit from today.
Maybe a couple of things I'll add to that is, if you look at all the disruptions, I would probably classify them as coming out of one of three, or a combination of one or more of three megatrends. The first one is certainly around sustainability. We've talked about that. The second one is probably around energy security, and that's both for the rural type of environments that Luke referred to, but also for larger countries, right, where at some point, because of the oil spike, people wanted to move away or at least diversify that risk. The third, which is probably what is driving everything that we've seen in the last maybe year or two, is around the demand side. And Jean-Pierre was referring to this. You can call it empowerment, you can call it sort of urbanization or choice or whatever that might be, but where the consumers are increasingly demanding choice and control. And you're seeing that across everything in media, in the way that we want our telephones and TVs to function, but then also the way that same desire is extending to the way our transportation systems work, our electricity systems work, etc. And I think those are three very fundamental activities and trends which will keep driving all of these disruptions over the coming future.
Oui, enfin, je voulais compléter parce que là, on parle beaucoup de technologie, mais quand on parle de disruption, la question à se poser, c'est celle des bénéfices. Et les bénéfices ne sont pas forcément des gains technologiques ou des gains financiers, mais si, quels sont les bénéfices humains globaux, parce que toute disruption apporte des aspects positifs, mais aussi des aspects négatifs. Et aujourd'hui, même une entreprise qui a pour finalité de faire des gains et des profits ne veut pas se détacher de ses parties prenantes. Et quand on parle de climat, on a à la fois, quand on est une entreprise, la responsabilité de diminuer ses impacts, évidemment de faire des profits pour pouvoir continuer socialement à avoir des collaborateurs, à tenir son rôle, mais aussi à apporter des solutions. Donc ça, c'est une nouvelle approche, sans oublier fondamentalement que, y compris dans les salariés des entreprises, la disruption amène une réaction négative de beaucoup de gens. Beaucoup de gens ont beaucoup de mal, n'ont pas forcément l'agilité à s'approprier ces grandes disruptions. Donc, je crois que c'est une vraie conscience qu'on doit avoir parce que il ne faut pas perdre de vue que l'objectif est quand même, quand on parle de climat et d'énergie aussi, la qualité de vie et bien mesurer les conséquences qu'on peut avoir.
Okay, and I'll let the questions to the floor in a couple of minutes, please. My second question is about geography, and this is something we discussed. Are disruptions in the energy sector happening in the same way everywhere, or do we see pockets of disruption? Do we see different speed of disruption depending on the geography? And why do we see these differences happening between the different geographies?
Maybe I can address at least the first point, because we see a worldwide market on solar. Definitely there are two worlds. One is OECD countries with a consumption of electricity which is stagnating, either a little increasing or decreasing due to energy efficiency, essentially. And so this is one world where new technologies like renewable, solar or wind are replacing existing technologies. So this is creating much more disruption in the energy markets, as we see in Europe, for example, or in the US, because you see the price of electricity, overcapacity of power generation, price decreasing, requiring a transformation of the whole market design, which is ongoing here in Europe. And this discussion is ongoing, and we'll end up with a new market design. We have to invent something new to be able to incorporate renewable energy, which is marginally at zero cost and does not fit with the existing design of the electricity market. But then we have the other world. The other world is emerging developing countries, emerging economies, and these have growth. These countries have still a lot of growth, and they incorporate much more easily this transformation because they are adding new capacity and they select technologies based on their relative merits. And definitely we see, for example, China have been, this year, China is expected to add 20 gigawatts of solar technology. France just added 1 gigawatt, just to give you an example. It's 20 times more than what France did on solar. So it's really huge. And they are able to do that because they are adding new capacity. So they choose to select this technology instead of coal, as they would have done 10 years before. Same for India, or for Brazil. Or for, so this is a very different world. So it's much more easy and less disruptive, although it will incorporate transformation of the grid, of the energy system. But they will grow. The whole system will grow with the country, so it's much more easy for them.
And Jelip, you had mentioned that also you see a difference between, it depends on whether there is competition happening in the country.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, is how is the market structured, right? So there are markets where there are monopolies, regulations control which company can sell electricity. There isn't a lot of disruption there. Wherever there is competition, you see a lot more disruption happening. The other thing, which is also geographic, is depending on where you are talking about, there's disruption happening everywhere. It's just which technologies are driving the disruption that's different. So, talking about the developing markets, I was just reading a study recently about Africa and the drive to do rural electrification in Africa. And the primary reason why people want electricity there is to charge their mobile phones, not to power the house, which they can do equally well through a gas lamp, but it's really to charge up a mobile device. And so there, the technologies that are getting adopted and the dynamics around who is supplying the technology, who's installing it, who's operating it, who's maintaining it, are very different from where the objective for the penetration of solar is to provide primary power to light up your house. Right? So there are a lot of regional differences that come because of just simply how the market functions and what the people want that electricity for.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit more about digital. This was an alternative name for the conference. So will there be a Uberization of the energy sector? Because we are really at the beginning of digital really affecting the business models and the sector. So what do you see coming next? And will there be a significant transformation of the energy sector due to digital?
Yes, maybe I can address a couple of comments there. Definitely the marriage between the digital revolution and the energy system will be very transformative, but we only see the beginning now. We see the beginning only now, and I think about all the home electricity management services, energy services provided to company, to homes, which is under extremely dynamic activities in the US, for example. Less in Europe, but very strongly in the US. We see new companies, newcomers, new players, extremely innovative and offering services. But there, the technology is existing, the digital, digital objects, connected objects and everything. This is existing today, under development, but it's existing. What does not exist yet is the business model. It's hard to make money into selling. For example, who would pay? Who of us, I mean in the audience, would pay for service to be better informed on its electricity consumption? Smart meters and everything. I'm not sure you would be ready to pay something additional for this service because you already don't look at your bill already. So there's not a lot of money there. So we try to go into more integrated services like optimization. How you optimize there is a potential of 10 to 20% cost reduction on your energy. So this is a little bit more money. So maybe you can sell this service to someone. That you will be ready to pay something for a company to run a software and optimize your energy consumption. So this is possible. Today it's just in the limbo. It's just starting. And it's very dangerous and risky to start this type of business because you're not sure that people will really take the advantage of this service. Later on, you have the additional service of being an aggregator. So you have a virtual power plant of you make a contract with maybe 100,000 homes, and you group all these producers, maybe solar producers, and maybe they have batteries at home or they have electric vehicle, and you can develop a software to run all that, and then you will they will take a contract, and then you will be able to sell all this system, this power plant services to the grid or to a consumer, to another company. This is really the beginning of that, but yes, we expect a revolution in that dimension. Maybe it takes some years.
And sorry, along the same line, I would like also to build upon something that you said, Jaydeep, about the evolution of the large utilities. And so we've seen some transformations already. There are further transformation alluding. What should we expect to be? Who should we expect to be the winners and losers of all these transformation? So will the utilities still be the one leading the energy sector? Will the big data companies, the Google, the Yahoo, take a large chunk of it, or will there be new players?
We have a lot of these utilities as customers, and we see a lot of them suffering because they have to reinvent their whole culture, business model, and a new relationship with their customers. So some of them took very dramatic move. RWE has completely changed its strategy. E.ON is splitting the company in two, but they had to reinvent almost from scratch that. Many of them are looking to acquire some of these small technology companies, maybe to help them buy the culture, buy the idea, but they are really in a bad shape, the energy or electricity utilities to lead this revolution, especially when you speak about this new relationship with the communities. For example, in Germany, E.ON and RWE were not community friendly. They were the national kind of companies, and if a municipality wants to set a kind of thing, they want to do that out of the old monopolies, and it would be very difficult for them to change the way they are seen to be the new partners, even if they are probably extremely good at doing that. So it will be difficult, and it depends on the country. In other countries, you see France, in 20 years from now, EDF would probably still be here. I mean, because we made everything to keep it. So it really depends on the level of disruptions, the choice of the local governments. But we'll see a lot of new players coming in this new era, and some countries will be leaders, other followers. Not all utilities will disappear or reduce. Some of them, like ENGIE, you see a very deep transformation that has been started. But when you have a group of more than 100,000 people to change, it's a huge change, but it's in process, So it may work. ENGIE, compared to the others, they have a big footprint in all the emerging countries compared to EDF or E.ON or RWE. So maybe they are a better place to learn from these emerging countries, apply some ideas in Europe. There would be no rule, but they have to change if they want to adapt to the new era.
Maybe one other interesting thing that was recently a study that we did, which was looking at the perception of consumers towards their energy providers. And across the board, across a variety of different countries, the one predominant conclusion is people simply don't trust their current energy provider. And in a lot of cases, they don't like them, but at least across the board, they don't trust them. And what that means is if you want to have renewables penetrate or energy efficiency penetrate, and if it's coming from somebody you simply don't trust, it's going to be that much harder to make the case for saying switch over to something that's disruptive. And that probably creates an opportunity for other companies, right? So startups you heard about from Jean-Pierre, but also maybe an IKEA. IKEA has a big solar business now where they'll sell you and then install the solar panel and all the rest. But now that comes from a player that the consumer probably likes more and relates to a lot more than they do to a large electric utility company. You see the role that Tesla is playing, where they're simply making home energy storage cool. And that is something, again, that appeals to a certain section of the customer base. So I think if you see what's common between the two, it's probably an ability to be more customer-friendly and be more service-oriented, which is probably what creates an opportunity for those companies relative to a large utility player. Which means, again, if you extend that out to a few years, the only way that existing utilities can continue to be dominant in a competitive world is if they change from being a seller of electricity to a provider of services. Yeah.
Maybe I can add a couple of comments on the other business model. Yes, utilities. What we observe from utilities is some of them are creating new companies or old companies holding the old traditional business, because sometimes it's difficult to have collaborators working on a different world. Sometimes you need to create a new company, and they will develop new business. For oil and gas, also, this is very disruptive. I mean, because we thought for many years, the past 10 years maybe, that we were going to a world of rare oil and gas resources, so limited resources, and we've seen this peak oil stuff and everything coming up. So with the stabilization of production, and since maybe 2-3 years, we are realizing, of course, that we are an abundance of oil and gas, an abundance of coal, and that the reality is that the future will be constrained by demand, not by supply. But this is a totally new way of looking at things. We had all our scenarios based on limited supply, and demand was supposed to be always there, growing all the time by emerging economies and everything. And the new world is that probably demand will be limited by climate change issues. And from what we understand, the world of fossil fuel will have to be a little bit more determined, because into that there are big differences. Fossil fuels will still remain there, as was mentioned, in 20, 30, 40 years, but in a more competitive in between them. And gas is making electricity with half the amount of CO2 compared to coal. And this is going to make a big difference. If there is a CO2 price around the planet, what we expect from the decisions to be taken in Paris, for example, next month, then the price of CO2 will make difference between coal and gas for power generation. And what we believe within Total is that there is a future for complementarity between renewable energy and gas, but definitely coal at some point will have to remain in the ground. There is no room in our atmosphere for all the CO2 contained into the coal. So this would require to make a difference between different fossil fuels, but we don't hear that a lot yet.
Oui, je voulais effectivement, votre question est intéressante sur l'évolution, parce que qu'est-ce qui mène la transformation? C'est évidemment la capacité d'innovation, d'invention. C'est une capacité humaine importante, mais c'est aussi ce développement du numérique qui prend toute sa place, rendant possible beaucoup de choses, mais globalement une contrainte environnementale. Et moi, ce qui m'inquiète aussi beaucoup, c'est l'aspect de temporalité. On est aujourd'hui sur des échéances extrêmement courtes qui ne permettent pas au marché de se réguler aussi rapidement qu'on voudrait dans ces évolutions. Et la question, je crois, est effectivement, est-ce que c'est, comme vous le disiez, Google ou les grands utilities qui vont rester leaders sur le sujet de l'énergie, mais les échéances sont beaucoup trop courtes en termes environnementaux, en termes climatiques, et on a besoin d'accélérer tout ça. Et c'est pour ça que cette COP21 va être aussi importante sur l'énergie. Donc c'est pour ça aussi que nous, dans Solutions COP21 au Grand Palais, on va ouvrir un débat avec des dizaines de milliers de personnes, parce qu'il faut impliquer beaucoup plus les usagers dans cette affaire. On n'a pas le temps d'attendre que le marché se régule. Le GIEC a fait des recommandations sur les énergies fossiles. On peut les contester, elles sont contestées de moins en moins. On a besoin d'accélérer énormément les choses, et en tout cas d'être dans une approche globale qui implique tout le monde et qui effectivement peut permettre d'envisager un climat concurrentiel très différent entre utilities. Enfin, je crois qu'à un moment donné, là, c'est plus de se poser la question est-ce que c'est Total ou Google qui va gagner, mais c'est comment ensemble ils vont pouvoir nous apporter des solutions à l'échelle de ce calendrier qui est extrêmement rapide et qui nous permet de diminuer l'impact sur les planètes. Et ça, on a besoin de tous les acteurs, qu'ils soient publics ou privés. Je crois que c'est vraiment une alliance très puissante et je crois que faut même plus peut-être se poser la question, est-ce que c'est le numérique ou les grands utilities ou chaque particulier qui est capable de gérer l'efficacité énergétique, qui est quand même une priorité, mais c'est comment améliorer la collaboration entre tous les acteurs autour de la table, parce que si on n'a pas cette collaboration-là, on n'aura pas de résultat, on va à une catastrophe écologique, donc de nos conditions de vie, de qualité de vie, et donc aussi de problèmes de pérennité des modèles économiques des grandes entreprises qui sont aujourd'hui des employeurs qui font vivre des millions de personnes. Enfin, on est quand même sur une boucle permanente.
Très bien. Je vais laisser la parole à la salle. Do we have questions in the room? One question.
Yeah. Well, it's a comment and then maybe a question. Now, I have to say I was very frustrated until the last minutes of this debate because I came here with the word disruption. Now, myself, I invest a lot in digital disruption and also a little in clean tech. And I think big words are missing here, are maybe understatements of the importance. Things like user-centric, things like data-based things. And that's the way, I mean, in many other industries, the big traditional players have been sitting here like you and saying, you know, we have time, you know, it's going to come, but, you know, it's a long process. And then AirBnB started to rent more, you know, accommodation than any hoteling company in the world. So that goes very fast, and it goes very fast when it's user-based. So my big question would be, what is the next user experience in energy? Because that's what's going to make the big difference, is as a consumer, I want to have a different experience with energy. And maybe in the fact that I dislike the present energy utilities, is that energy utilities doesn't seem me as a consumer. I'm just the one who is, you know, paying for a kilowatt hour. And maybe the user experience is going to be different. And maybe the people that will address the user experience quickly in a more innovative way, which is what Uber, Airbnb, and all those guys have been doing with the digital, they are going to take the clients, and then when they have the clients, they come back to the energy players and treat them such as commodity sellers. And so the question here is maybe how do you reinvent the user experience in energy, and if you don't do it, what are those new players? And I don't think it's Google. It's maybe new startups, maybe not Google. Now, how those new players are going to give myself as a consumer a better experience, and then I give them my data, and then those guys are going to find the energy I need, and then energy is just a commodity, and so. How do you react to that? How do you react to new user experience, data? Who are those guys getting the best data on energy, etc.?
Thank you for your question. In terms of electricity services, we at Total are very new. We are outsider. We are not utilities. We don't produce electricity, not a lot. I mean, we produce for our consumption, but we don't sell to customers. So we are developing this business through solar. I mean, we are from solar. We went to sell to people solar plus batteries, and now we want solar plus batteries plus software, plus weather forecast, production forecast on solar. You know, we are going down this line to be able to sell to, essentially in the US today, but probably worldwide then, additional services. So we are going down this line to try to provide to consumers, to US consumers today, a better experience, as you mentioned. And we are competing into that with new players like SolarCity or Vivint or other companies that are selling rooftop solar to US citizens very fast, and so we are in a very tight competition into the quality of service and the speed of service. You know, some of these services are you just go into a website, you ask for a simulation of your rooftop, and within weeks you have people coming to your home and proposing to install in 2 days some solar. So it's very, very fast, so very competitive. And yes, there is the risk of being Uberized, as you say, very fast. So this is one experience we have. The other one I would say is more whether our traditional business model, like selling gasoline into gas stations, this might be Uberized. So we are asking ourselves this question, and of course it is possible. So we are creating work groups very fast and challenging our own business model to make sure that if there is something to be done, we do it before anyone else does it. So we're working on that, yes, absolutely. And I think any business should, I agree with you, this has been very fast, and any business should raise this type of questions. Is my traditional business model sustainable in this new world?
Just one word, I mean, there is a physical reality in electricity, and there is a cost and investment reality. And if the costs are going down, then the technology may be able to do these descriptions. And now we are at a point where the cost of solar, the cost of maybe storage could be in the equation, making something extremely popular, accessible, and that can be generated, and then to scale up this. These new companies may be better to say, and the cost curves are crossing, not yet now, maybe in 1 year from now, but it's really to be monitored. And yeah, the combination between local production, local batteries, doing things into the neighborhood, these are the next things which will be made available if the costs go, you know, if we have a factor 2 of reduction more. This will be there. But this factor 2 will not be achieved by manufacturing. I think we have done a lot in manufacturing. I need to have a few evolution in physics because the cell efficiency has improved, but the real thing has been the manufacturing itself. So if we want to go further down, there needs to be disruption in the physical. And when we speak about disruption, you mean digital, but the new disruption today is coming between the real and the digital together. And you know, Tesla, it's about a lot of material sciences and software. And so it's not going to be, AirBnB will not disrupt, I think, that. Or it will use the technology provided by somebody else. But we need a technology disruption on top of the IT to make the disruption in energy. But it will occur, and it will spread fast as well.
Maybe one other thing. There is no shortage of startups that are trying to go after user experience, right? I mean, you've heard them mention North America has a slew of them doing everything from somebody will go after improving user experience in hotels, and others will go after user experience in supermarkets and for energy. So electricity used and demand management in hospitals and demand management in military installations. So there's every consumer segment you can think about, there is a company trying to do something about the user experience. The challenge there in this space, unlike a lot of others that have been disrupted by purely digitization, is that there is a physical asset that at some point you need to own, which and the asset, its cost viability and its regulatory approval is very closely linked to the local dynamics around the market, the net metering laws, whatever those might be. So you almost are looking at micro disruptions right now, right? So where there is a disruption for North California, there's a disruption for the Bay Area, there's a disruption for Southern California, there's a disruption for San Diego specifically, and different companies are doing, you know, focused things there. A key insight around consumer experience or user experience that has come up is people aren't willing to pay for comfort. They want to pay for cost reduction. So if your technology is going to reduce their bill and it's going to do it without the user having to do a lot, then it's a viable approach for that particular market and sub-market. So as you think about which companies to invest in or work with that provide you an interesting growth proposition, look for things that provide consumers a intervention-free cost reduction in their electricity bills for that specific market, and there you might have a micro winner for that particular industry.
Yes, question. Another common question, David?
If you think of current Uberization, you can think in terms of customer service, etc. But you could also see that in terms of unused capacity. Our friend of BlaBlaCar, they have identified unused seats. Airbnb have identified unused beds. And some other company, you could make the same type of analysis. Uber have identified unused time of people. Do you think, for example, that could be Jean-Pierre who try to make the market match together, that there is some kind of unused distributed electricity or energy capacity that someone could try to merge and to make meet with the demand? Does this unused energy exist somewhere?
Very good question, yes. What we observe from the development of solar and wind is that when there is a lot of capacity installed, like Germany, for example, or California, when the wind blows in Germany, the price of electricity falls to zero. When there is a lot of sun in California, and this is already starting, but in the coming years, the price of electricity in the midday will fall to zero. We will have an abundance of electricity available at cheap price. So this is definitely an issue. What are we going to do with all this electricity? Are we going to convert it into gas, for example, hydrogen? That's a possibility, but because you can store hydrogen, it's energy, so it's back to energy. But of course, you could use it for many other applications. All this available free energy indeed will be there. But I don't know any companies yet working on that, but I think aggregators would be the right person probably to make bands out of all this unstructured electricity at the wrong time, produced at the wrong time where there is no demand in front of it. What do we do with that?
Maybe an example of a company that I can give is STEM, that some of you might be familiar with in, again, the west coast of the US. They're doing this in a step-by-step fashion, right? So the first step that they're trying to do is sell behind-the-meter energy storage. So convince residential customers and retail customers to put in a battery next to the meter, behind the meter. Where they're going with this next is sort of the aggregator model, which is to say, okay, now we have all of these deployed assets of capacity just sitting there. And so the model that they are trying to impose is to sell to the utility a demand response mechanism, right? Whereby you say, okay, if there is an event somewhere in the grid, we will, across all of this installed asset base, find a way to give you 1 megawatt of excess capacity that you can deploy somewhere else. So this role of an aggregator is very, very interesting and important. But it starts with getting that physical asset deployed somewhere of energy storage, which is why, as I mentioned, this emerging dynamic around electric cars and the storage capacity that's going to be inherent around those. You know, if a company can find a way to be an aggregator around that asset, that'd be really interesting.
Maybe if you allow me, I will adjust. One thing is, beyond just energy production or storage, you also have demand-side management. So this is a huge aspect. So exactly on the same line is displacing consumption. You displace your need of electricity from peak hours to night, for example. We used to do that for many years to heat water in France, with nuclear energy. You can heat a lot of water in your home, and you use it in the morning, and it is still hot in the evening. So this has been working, but we can develop that at much larger scale now, using solar energy in the day and displacing your consumption. So I think there are also a lot of resource of energy.
Another question?
You were just saying that we were running after time to solve the problem of energy efficiency. So what's your vision about the capacity market to solve and to regulate this demand and offer problem? Do you think it's going to be a solution to...
yeah, because that's an issue we haven't solved. I mean, in electricity, because we're speaking a lot about electricity, can be stored, but on real time you need to have an equal balance between supply and demand. And with all these disruptions that we have seen, maybe even if these are not IT disruptions, these political disruptions have totally changed the sector. And there is a big issue, which is how do you ensure that in case of non-availability of the intermittent production, that you still have sufficient power to avoid blackout, which is, fortunately in France we don't have a lot of blackouts. We forgot that, but when I was a kid we had a lot of them, and we don't want to come back to this era. So there are different initiatives in Europe, and the countries are not in line with each other to see what is the correct solution. So one of the solutions which has been chosen by France is to create a capacity market. So there is now a capacity registry. We operate in my company, and there will be a capacity market. The first auction will be in February. We'll also do it in my company. But really 3 months out before that, people have no clue whether this will solve or not the problem. Somehow it's a very, very, very complex bureaucratic mechanism to solve an issue. And in France, especially where EDF has the biggest part of the production, they will set the price of this capacity mechanism. So they have done a huge mechanism just to ask a price to EDF, which will probably be dictated by the politicians. So it's a test. We'll see what this leads. In Germany, we have done something totally different. We have introduced last month a new product, which is valorizing flexibility, kind of options. We call it cap futures, which could, in a way, help people that have reserve capacity to get remunerated by having these options. But that's very new. So even in Germany, we don't know whether this will work. And the EU has a different way of doing that. So in some countries, they are subsidizing certain peak assets. That has been done for many, many years. But they want to look into this subsidization to be sure that it's being fair. But really, this will be the biggest issue. And this issue of intermittent is very big. We had an event in March, which was, I think, really a shock for the people, which was the eclipse on the 21st of March. People realize, shit, now we have an eclipse, but the sun will go down. And in Germany, if it's one day where we have a lot of solar production, there will be a big mess. We published a study last month on the result of this on this eclipse. You can find that on our website. And the effect was really really interesting to see. Fortunately, it was a very cloudy day in most of Europe, so the effect of the eclipse was not as big as we saw. So I think that's the number here. We went from 15 gigawatt of solar production down to 7 and up to 22 in a matter of 2 hours. And all the system had to adapt to that. We had to launch in our company 15 minutes contract so that people could buy slots of 15 minutes and not slot of 1 hour of production. And the 15-minute products before the eclipse and after the eclipse, it went from 380 euros to minus 200 euros, in a time of 2 hours, just to deal with that. So it means that you have to, there will be a physical reality in electricity, and it's not going to be like AirBnB, because somehow you need to continue the service. So there will be disruption, but we have to be sure that this disruption doesn't cause interruption of service. You can see that maybe in taxi where people complain, but at least you find your way. But in electricity, it will be dramatic if this disruption kills, let's say, the public service or the continuation of service that we have to continue. And there needs to be a lot of innovation to make sure that this is working as a system.
Maybe to answer a little bit your question with a different point of view. The issue is the one of stranded assets in OECD countries, in developed countries, because we have too much capacity of producing electricity. So the more you add, the more you go into the energy transition, the more you go with renewable energy, the less hours is remaining for the functioning of the traditional capacities on coal, on gas. So depending on the relative price of coal and gas and depending on the price of CO2, the merit order will be different, and you will first shut the gas plant and then the coal plants, but all the other way around depending on the parameters. But essentially, we have this capacity that used to run for 5,000 hours or 4,000 hours, and now will only run for 3,000 and then 2,000 hours in the year. This is not enough to have an economic sustainability for these projects. But the more you add renewable energy, the lower you lower the price of electricity all the time. So this is a bit of a paradox. It's a bit of the paradox. But the good way to solve this problem in the long term is to remove from the system the most CO2 emitting capacities. So essentially, you should phase out lignite plants in Germany or in Poland, and then coal power plants. So if you remove all these aging plants which are emitting a lot of CO2 and replacing them with new energies, renewable energy, then you solve the problem of price of electricity. You again stabilize the energy-only market. So in the long term, you don't really need capacity markets if you are able to recover a reasonable equilibrium of capacity in Europe. Today, there has been a demand. Member states have been asking for that systems of capacity mechanism of different shapes, as was explained very well. Probably we need them for a transitory period, but at some point, hopefully, a new system, a new market design, 2.0, should solve this problem, and earlier retirement, I would say, of the most aging capacities in Germany. Not in France anymore. I don't think we have a lot of coal plants anymore. But Germany, Poland, Eastern Europe have still a lot of coal capacities that should be removed.
One last question.
Yeah, please. I think it's time to talk about smart grid. I guess you know what is smart grid. More globally, we can talk about smart energy, which is not just focused on electricity market, but on the whole energy vectors. Do you think that microgrid or smart grid, smart energy, in every point of a territory, everywhere, could address this issue and could be the major disruption in this area?
Oui, moi je pense effectivement que c'est une rupture qui est déjà en train de se faire. Enfin, c'est encore une fois une façon de garantir quand même la qualité de vie dans la ville, parce qu'on a besoin d'énergie pour toutes les activités humaines, et de faire avancer les questions d'efficacité. Et si on ne met pas d'instruments de mesure, d'évaluation et de pilotage, il n'y a pas d'efficacité possible. Mais derrière, ça pose aussi plein de questions dont il faut débattre. Je crois qu'on a la nécessité d'accélérer très très rapidement maintenant la mise en œuvre des smart grids, smart cities, ou smart energy, enfin, toute la ville intelligente au service de l'énergie. Mais pour cela, il faut, enfin, je reviens à ce que je disais tout à l'heure, il faut régler cette question d'acceptabilité, et notamment cette question aussi de démocratie, de propriété de la donnée, de la façon de la partager, qui est propriétaire de quoi. Et il y a une forte montée très très forte en ce moment qu'on voit au niveau des élus dans les villes, qui commencent à rejeter ce mot smart grid en disant mais moi je perds. Alors c'est aussi français, je crois que ça dépend des pays où on considère dans certains pays que c'est tout à fait normal de déléguer la gestion de la donnée et du pilotage à des entreprises, et c'est pas le cas partout dans le monde, et c'est même dans un pays comme la France pas le cas forcément dans toutes les villes. Par exemple, la relation de Bordeaux et de Paris est très différente par rapport à ça, et pour ces questions-là, ça pose effectivement ces questions de la mesure et de la nécessité d'impliquer et de mettre en débat les sujets, ce qui n'a pas été le cas réellement pour l'instant.
Je précisais tout de même que je voulais parler de smart grid plus exactement à un niveau local. J'ai employé le mot microgrid, boucle locale d'énergie, si vous voulez, où chacun peut effectivement monter son propre réseau privé quelque part. Et dans ces cas-là, ces questions que vous mentionnez sont un petit peu secondaires.
Alors, j'en suis pas sûr, pardon, mais ce qui est sûr, c'est qu'il faut se poser, il y a deux questions majeures en dehors de ça, qui est la question de la péréquation territoriale. C'est quand même un sujet majeur. Dans ce pays, qui est la France, mais c'est le cas dans d'autres pays, il y a une logique qui est considérée comme justice sociale, c'est que chacun paye le kilowatt d'énergie le même prix, qu'il soit dans une île bretonne, au centre de Paris ou dans le sud-est, près de chez moi. Donc ça c'est une question importante. Est-ce qu'on remet en cause ou pas cette question? Donc en gros, est-ce que le consommateur d'énergie paye en fonction du prix de revient de l'énergie, du kilowatt, quand on parle d'électricité ou pas? Je crois que c'est une question majeure. Et la deuxième question, c'est celle de la sécurisation, puisque c'est tout à fait intéressant, et plus les gens s'approprient eux-mêmes leur îlot, leur quartier durable, leur capacité à produire leur propre énergie. Il y a évidemment un projet intéressant parce que ça sensibilise les gens. Et quand les gens sont dans ce genre de démarche, ils font attention à leur comportement en termes d'énergie. Et ce n'est pas qu'une question d'argent. Mais la question derrière tout ça, c'est quand même de garantir la sécurité. On a besoin d'énergie pour les hôpitaux, pour l'éducation, pour la mobilité, pour ce qui fait ce que la plupart des habitants, des hommes et des femmes, considèrent comme les conditions mêmes de qualité de vie et de sécurisation de leur vie.
En fait, ça reviendrait à faire en sorte que tous les consommateurs deviennent producteurs.
Maybe you're opening a very interesting issue about smart. I think we addressed a little bit this by talking about marriage of digital and energy. What is exactly the same thing. I think the concept was on the table, and yes, definitely, to develop this, you would require better price signals to the consumer. And this is not the case in France, but in many countries, you are able to develop price signal for the consumer, time of use signals. I mean, you don't want to pay the electricity the same price at each hour of the day. And if you are able to have that's what digital is bringing to you, is the exact knowledge of when the price of electricity is high or low. And your algorithm at your home will be able to switch your production, your solar panels, for example, production, either into storage or into the grid or into consumption in your home, depending on the price signal that you need. And yes, the French peréquation is totally against that and make it impossible. So I don't think there is a lot of future with this position, which is very specific and dates for historic time in France of 1945. It was not like that before. So it's very specific in time. It should not be a taboo. It should be on the table. It should be discussed. Do we really need to continue with that peréquation? Especially, this is killing renewable energy development in overseas territories of France, you know, and because they don't pay the electricity at the cost, so they're not incentivized to develop, to use renewable energy. So it's bringing a lot of problems. And you don't pay your water the same price everywhere. You don't pay your fuel everywhere. You don't pay any other services. I mean, even heat for district heating is not the same price everywhere. Just electricity. So this is a political choice that France made 50 or 60 years ago. I think at some point we will have to come over that decision and rethink.
And this gives me the opportunity for my very last short question. We've seen disruption happening in many markets, but not really in France. So when will we see massive disruption happening in our country? What is your best bet?
From what we have observed this summer, as recent as this summer, is a transformation of the perception of the French administration at the highest level. I'm talking about the Ministry of Finance, about the possibility to develop solar in France. You know, there has been for many, many years, France was the country of cheap nuclear power, and we wanted to have this advantage, so we don't need to pay for solar, because solar was displacing nuclear, so with no CO2 benefit. And we were supposed to buy Chinese products and have many problems. So this was the main perception. So we remained with a very low profile on solar in France for many years. But we just changed this summer because the last tender proved that solar was now competitive with other alternatives. And this really was a surprise. It came a surprise in many circles of power in France. And now we are seeing a very upward trend. And we expect the next program, the PPE, the energy programming, multi-annual programming law coming up soon, before the end of this month, as our Minister Ségolène Royal announced it. I think in this we will see growth for solar in France, definitely above 1 gigawatt per year. So really similar to what Germany does or what UK has been doing. So I expect really a change in at least in solar. Wind is going better this year than past years. So wind is also developing fast. Of course, you will have to break some issues about monopoly, the way you can sell electricity in France. Maybe I think we should try some experience on self-consumption in France, and we are waiting for that. Self-consumption is really the future disruptive factor for our energy system. I hope some openings are also coming up in France for next year.
And maybe a non-French view on the topic.
As an American-educated Indian citizen living in Netherlands, I'm clearly the authority on what is going to happen in France. But I think from a different perspective, what I'd say is, you're seeing that with Uber in France. There is, from a completely different angle, the consumer experience and expectation angle. At the grassroots, there is a lot happening. There is absolutely nothing that the French consumer needs to give away that an American consumer can get, right? So if they can get a Nest thermostat, why shouldn't a French consumer get it? If they can get an ability to have some benefit stacking, why shouldn't a French consumer get that? And so what is happening now, which is probably very unique, and we haven't seen it before, is because of this rapid pace of technology development, all of these solutions are fully democratized. They're globally available. And a consumer today can see what is possible, which means that that probably within a lot shorter time frame than we have ever expected. So I would be surprised if in 10 years you aren't seeing a regulatory support for demand-side management, even in France, because probably no OECD country can get away without providing that ability to its customers. So that would be my...
Okay, many thanks. I think we can give a big applause to our panelists. So thank you and a very good evening to everybody. Bonne soirée à tous.